And thank you, everyone. My group was tasked with thinking about accelerating lab to market. And most of our group was from under-resourced or EBSCOR states. And so we chose to focus on this challenge by improving the average. There's a lot of institutions or regions that do very well with this, but our focus was helping those less resource states improve their performance. And a list of all the members is down below. But I'd also like to call out the countless others who participated either in interviews or feedback conversations along the way. If we click to the next slide, the life of an academic researcher, as you know, is very busy. You've got to inspire the next generation of scientific leadership. You've got to find time to grade and give feedback on everything you ask them to do. You probably stay up very late at night pushing the boundaries of science to advance fundamental research. More and more, we ask you to get out on the streets and actually make sure that community cares about what you're doing. And last but not least, you're an important part of economic development where we hope you'll start a company and grow our national GDP. And this is a lot. And if you click to the next slide, when it is done well, you can be celebrated like a rock star. But if you click to the next slide, we all know that this is done with a lot of different support efforts. First and foremost, your institution or community must support and provide a culture that encourages these types of efforts. We've heard from researchers the critical need of post-award administration. Getting the award is only the first step to completing the work. Some areas have entire teams built around industry engagement. How do you connect to the community to ensure that you're solving a problem that's relevant to your community? Of course, you need access to graduate students and postdocs that help complete the work. And last, but certainly not least, you've got to pay for all of this activity through increased funding. And there are world-class teams and individuals in every single one of these support roles, but traditionally they tend to be siloed within either their own institution or within their ecosystem at large. If you click to the next slide, this is an area that NSF has obviously put a lot of thought into. If you've been paying any attention to all the requests for proposals that have come out recently, there's been the Accelerating Research Translation or ART program. There's been the Growing Research Access for Nationally Transformative Equity and Diversity, or GRANTED. And these largely are focused at building capacity at some of these underserved areas. And if you look at some of the latest Dear Colleague letters that have been coming out, it's obvious that NSF is interested in continuing to nudge the culture to encourage this sort of effort. And then also very specific opportunities like targeting that post-award research management aspect. So just to reiterate what Ralph said earlier, NSF is listening and they want all of our feedback. If you click over to the next slide, taking all of this into consideration in our group, we took a look at what other people were doing and especially what was happening in the private sector. And if you click to the next slide, you don't have to digest all of this. These slides will be available afterwards, but there's been this rise of venture studios over the past decade that are very focused on putting teams together to build companies. And in specific industry verticals, they have demonstrated much improved success metrics over traditional approaches to funding early stage ventures. And if you click to the next slide, once again, you don't have to internalize all of this, but the key difference here is how do we pull those world-class individuals that are siloed to individual ecosystems or institutions and enable them to be a resource to a much broader source of technology and technology innovations so that we can scale this lab to market activity. And so if you click to the next slide, the Wouldn't It Be Fantastic If focus around our area came out with this idea for a national venture studio model. And if you click to the next slide, there was lots of key things that this new thing would have to do. Most importantly, it'd have to collaborate and leverage local and regional networks. This can't be a top-down solution. It needs to expand fellowships and funding for graduate students and postdocs to engage in this type of activity. And one thing that really stood out is the need to provide rapid access to funds for lab to market activities. And if you click to the next slide, most of these pieces, if you squint just right, there's infrastructure in place that could potentially be leveraged. For instance, we already have the regional innovation networks funded by NSF that are quite geographically distributed across the US. And if you click to the next slide, we also have the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship programs. And having been one of the recipients of these during my grad school days, a lot of these folks are interested in this type of work. So how do we enable them to do more and engage in this effort? And if you click to the next slide, there's also precedent for delivery of rapid funds. If anyone's looked at the SBIR, STTR programs, there's things like TABA or technical and business assistance funding that can be turned around on pretty short notice if the funds are directed at an eligible expense or engagement with a specific entity to help you move things along. So all of these things in some stage exist. And if you click to the next slide, the thinking in our group was around how do you pull all of these things together and what could this thing look like? So this is about as PowerPointy of a slide as we could possibly make. But in the middle is this concept for a science or research venture studio that can intersect or interact with all of the NSF or TIP-funded innovations by having awareness about what they're doing, provided rapid funding for reduction to practice. They can leverage NSF's reach with partner industries to make sure we're sourcing problems for researchers to solve. It can provide on-ramps for successful entrepreneurs looking for their next venture, or just an entrepreneur in general who wants to find an idea to run with. And then obviously, most importantly, the researchers in the lab can have increased pathways to get involved in this sort of work and access the support and resources that they need. And if you click to the next slide, there's still a million questions left to answer around this concept. How does it complement and leverage local networks efficiently? How do you create some sort of cloud platform that brings this all together and is easy to interact with? What's the formal structure? How are we handling IP? What amount and source of funding is effective but efficient? And if you click one time for me real quick, there's probably a million reasons why this thing may not work. And if you click, please, our group at least thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if it did? And if you click to the next slide, borrowing this from a very successful venture studio focused in the IT space, but adhering to fair use exemptions under the US Copyright Act, our goal would be to partner with researchers to go further and faster together. If you click to the next slide. Next steps for us is we want your engagement, and you'll have an opportunity on the next slide. This needs to be fully informed by your efforts to make sure it is solving a need in your community. We have thought about organizing a formal workshop around this topic, and then fundamentally formalizing the feedback to NSF to try to make it actionable on their part. And if you click to the next slide, please follow this link to provide your contact info. We'd love to have you involved. There's still a lot more work to do. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to talking about this a lot more. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Doug. We had one non-question. Here we have one. Are venture studios discipline specific, or can they be broad-based?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically the way you do a successful venture studio, right, is you get people that are very focused on a particular topic area, right? And oftentimes today, that's very IT focused, right? You might have like a SaaS focused, software as a service focused venture studio, and that's what they do repeatedly, leveraging their unique expertise. I think something like this, right, the reason it doesn't work in traditional science is you don't have as patient of capital, but that's where I think NSF has proven they can be very patient with capital, right? So can you pull together teams with expertise in material science, right, in biomedical research? And remember, the goal here is not to necessarily launch a company. The goal is to reduce the risk of launching a company and finding product market fit.
Okay, thank you. One more question. How does this compare with I-Corps that exists at NSF?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would see this coming kind of pre-I-Corps or complementing I-Corps in some way. Having been a mentor in I-Corps several times, I think it's absolutely critical that faculty are educated around that process. But I think there's a lot of work we can do to bring more people along on that journey. Not everyone has the will or the ability to participate in I-Corps. And so something like this can complement that by kind of taking some of that burden off their plate and putting it on the shoulders of people who are excited to be working on that challenge, if that makes sense.
It does. All right. Thank you. And